Congratulations to the newest couple in town. Young men and women standing on the road that leads to Idato North, a happening city in Nigeria, echoes to the just wedded couple as they head towards their hometown. Blessing and her husband Stephen had just returned from their wedding ceremony. They were filled with joy, laughter, and excitement as they sat together. They decided to unwrap the gift they had received from their friends and family. Eager to see the surprises inside, one by one they opened each package, reading the congratulatory messages and smiling at the thoughtful gifts. Then, a peculiar gift caught their attention. It was wrapped with a beautiful shimmering golden paper, but had no name or message on it. "Who would send us something without a note?" Stephen asked, raising an eyebrow. They slowly unwrapped the mysterious gift, and inside was a mirror with a fancy golden frame, intricate and eye-catching. "I love this mirror," Blessing exclaimed, her eyes shining with delight. But Stephen wasn't as sure. "Who would give us a mirror as a wedding gift?" he asked, feeling little unease. "And with no name or message, that is strange." Blessing, however, was captivated. She gently lifted the mirror and said, "I think it will look lovely in the living room." She hung it on the wall, standing back to admire how it sparkled in the light, but something felt bit off to Stephen. "Are you sure about this mirror, Blessing?" he asked, still feeling a bit uneasy. "It seems different." "Oh, it's fine," Blessing replied, brushing off his concern. "It's unique." Just then, she got an idea. "Actually, maybe it will be better in our bedroom," she said. She carefully carried the mirror and mounted it on the wall of their bedroom, adjusting it until it looked perfect. As she left the room to join Stephen and finish unwrapping the other gifts, a thin dark smoke began swirling inside the mirror glass, almost as if it were alive. The smoke twisted and turned, forming shapes, twisting and coiling in the air like a snake. From that day, things began to change. Shadows moved where they should have been none, and strange noises filled the quiet room at night. After a joyful night of unwrapping gifts and sharing laughter, Blessing and Stephen finally lay down on their new cozy beds in their bedroom. They made love, then whispered sweet things to each other, holding hands, and eventually drift off to sleep, happy and content. In the early morning light, Blessing opened her eyes, smiling as she remembered the night before. "Good morning, honey," she greeted, stretching. Stephen turned to her, grinning, but before he could say anything, Blessing said, with a playful look, "Honey, the style you gave me in the middle of the night was amazing. I have never felt like that before. This is the best love I have ever had." Stephen's smile faded. "What are you talking about?" he asked, looking confused. "I didn't wake up in the middle of the night. I slept straight through." Blessing laughed, nudging him. "Oh, come on, don't be shy. I am talking about how you lifted my legs and gave me those different styles all night," she said with a grin. Stephen's face grew serious. "Blessing, I really don't know what you are talking about. I never woke up last night." The room went silent. Blessing's smile faded as she looked into Stephen's eyes, realizing he wasn't joking. Just then, a loud knock at the front door broke the silence, making them both jump. Blessing got up, her heart pounding a little faster than usual, and went to answer the door. When she opened the door, she saw her younger stepsister, Debbie, standing there with her luggage. "Good morning," Debbie greeted cheerfully, giving Blessing a hug. "Mama said I should come early so I can help you with the morning chores." "Oh, "Debbie, you are here already. Isn't it a bit too early?" Blessing asked, glancing back at Stephen, who was still sitting up in the bed, looking deep in thought. "No, Mama insisted I leave early," Debbie replied. "She thought I could get a head start and settle in," she said. Blessing gave a small uneasy smile, trying to shake off the strange feeling from moments before. She helped Debbie carry her luggage inside, showing her to the guest room as they settled Debbie in. Blessing couldn't stop thinking about what Stephen had said. If he wasn't with her in the middle of the night, who or what was? Months passed, and Blessing discovered she was pregnant. The news filled the house with joy. Blessing's husband Stephen was especially excited, dreaming of becoming a father. They both prepared eagerly, imagining their little one arrival. Each day felt brighter and their happiness grew. Then one night, as they lay sleeping in their cozy bed, something strange happened. In the quiet, a dark, misty smoke began to sway out of the mirror in their bedroom. Slowly the mirror thickened and twisted, forming a shadowy figure, a monster with dark eyes and a terrifying grin. It stepped out of the mirror and walked up to Blessing as she lay sound asleep, too deep in her dream to notice the strange visitor. The shadowy creature leaned over her, and she felt something strange, but she was too weak and sleepy to wake up fully. Half asleep, she thought it was Stephen, so she drifted back to sleep, thinking everything was okay. Suddenly, she jolted awake in the early morning light. She felt strange and weak, and as she looked down, her eyes widened in horror. There was blood all over the bed. Blessing let out a scream that echoed through the room, waking Stephen up. He sat up quickly, his face filled with shock and worry. "Blessing, what happened?" he asked, rushing to her side. But Blessing was crying, too shaken to explain. Stephen, alarmed, shouted for help, and Debbie, Blessing's stepsister, ran into the room. Together they helped Blessing out of the bed and rushed her to the hospital. After a long wait in the hospital, the doctor finally came out, his face heavy with sad news. He explained that Blessing had lost the baby. Blessing broke into tears, her heart shattered, and Stephen held her tightly, his own eyes filled with sorrow. After they returned home, Blessing's sadness quickly turned to anger. She looked at Stephen, her eyes blazing. "Why did you do this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Stephen looked confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. You know what I mean," Blessing replied. "You came to me in the middle of the night. I thought it was you, but now I feel like you hurt me somehow." Stephen was shocked. "Blessing, I swear I didn't wake up last night. I don't know what happened, but it wasn't me." But Blessing didn't believe him. Her heart was too heavy and her mind was full of questions. She blamed Stephen, and he couldn't seem to prove his innocence. These strange events keep happening. Each time Blessing became pregnant, something terrible would happen in the night. She felt a presence near her, but she was too weak to wake up fully. Each time she would lose the baby, and each time she would ask Stephen, "Why do you keep doing this?" But Stephen would look at her with sadness and insist he wasn't the person. Suddenly, the mysterious losses began to strain their marriage. Stephen tried to comfort Blessing, but she couldn't trust him. And in the corner of the room, the mirror stood silently, as if it were hiding a terrible secret. Its golden frame now looked less beautiful and more haunting. Stephen and Blessing's love and trust slowly crumbled as they kept wondering what is happening to their marriage. One day, Blessing found out she was pregnant again. She and Stephen were overjoyed, but this time they felt afraid too. They didn't want to lose another baby, so Stephen came up with an idea. "I will sleep in a different room," he said, holding Blessing's hand. "This way, nothing strange can happen. I will check on you every morning to make sure you are safe." Blessing agreed, though she felt nervous about sleeping alone. She took a deep breath and hoped that this time everything would be okay. One quiet night, Blessing lay asleep peacefully, her heart filled with hope for her little baby. But then a thick dark smoke began to slip out of the mirror's golden frame, twisting and coiling in the air like a snake. The room grew colder as the smoke turned into a shadowy figure, slowly creeping towards Blessing as she lay in her bed. In her sleep, Blessing felt something strange, a heavy weight beside her, a feeling that someone was there. She felt someone touching her, but her body felt so weak, she couldn't barely move. She tried to call out, but her voice was caught in her throat. She thought it might be a nightmare, but just then, she snapped awake, gasping for air. She sat up in her bed, her heart racing. When she looked down and her eyes filled with horror, there was blood all over the bed. She screamed, the sound echoing through the house. Her hands shook as she looked around, realizing the room was locked and she was all alone. Who was in here? She whispered to herself, fear gripping her heart. She had no idea who or what had been with her. Hearing her scream, Stephen rushed into the room, his face filled with worry and fear. Stephen and Debbie rushed down the hallway. Blessing, still shaking, managed to unlock the door, her hands trembling. When Stephen and Debbie saw her covered in blood, their faces turned pale with shock. Stephen knelt beside her, holding her hands. Blessing, what happened? I wasn't here. The door was locked. Who could have done this? Blessing looked into his eyes, unable to answer, as fear filled her heart. Debbie held Blessing's other hand, whispering, this is not normal. Something strange is happening. The next morning, Blessing felt scared and worried. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew something was very wrong. Her little sister Debbie could see how sad Blessing was, so she took her hands and whispered, Blessing, maybe we should call Mama. She always knows what to do. Blessing nodded, and immediately she called her stepmother, Mrs. Charity, on phone. Mrs. Charity had loved Blessing like her own daughter ever since Blessing's mother passed away. She listened carefully as Blessing explained everything. Oh, my dear Blessing, Mrs. Charity said in a gentle, calming voice. Don't worry, my child. We will find a way to make it all better. Come to my house tomorrow morning. I know someone who can help us. Early the next morning, Blessing and her husband, Stephen, got ready and drove to Mrs. Charity's house. The sun was shining, but Blessing couldn't shake the nervous feelings in her heart. When they arrived, Mrs. Charity welcomed them warmly, giving Blessing a big, comforting hug. She looked at Blessing with kind eyes and said, we are going to visit a special lady today. She is a prophetess, and she knows how to deal with things that are unusual. Blessing and Henry exchanged glances, not quite sure what to expect, but they trusted Mrs. Charity. Together they walked to the small, quiet house of prophetess deep in the village. The house was surrounded by tall trees, and the air felt heavy like it was filled with secrets. Inside, the prophetess was waiting for them. She was an older woman with a wise face, wearing a long flowing robe. She looked deeply into Blessing's eyes, as if she could see all the strange things that had been happening without a word. She nodded and gestured for them to sit. Then she closed her eyes and began to pray, her voice strong and steady. As she prayed, the air in the room seemed to thicken, and Blessing felt a chill run down in her spine. She squeezed Henry's hand, feeling safe by his side. But then the prophetess opened her eyes and spoke softly, her voice filled with mystery. Blessing, she said, you have been connecting to a water spirit, a powerful spirit from the deep water. It has been flowing you and causing these strange things. We must do a special prayer to set you free from it. Stephen's face turned pale. He held Blessing's hand tightly and said, please do whatever you need to do to help her. The prophetess looked at him and shook her head. I am sorry, young man, but this prayer, only women can stay. You must go home, and Blessing will stay here with us. Do not worry, we'll keep her safe. Stephen didn't want to leave, but he knew he had no choice. He kissed Blessing's hand and whispered, "I'll be back in the morning. Be brave." After he left, Blessing felt a little nervous, but her stepmother, Mrs. Charity, held her hands. The prophetess began to prepare for the night, lighting candles and sprinkling water around the room. Strange shadows cast on the wall, making everything look mysterious and little spunky. Late at night, just as the world was dark and quiet, the prophetess told Blessing to come to her shrine. The room was dimly lit, with candles flickering and casting strange shadows on the walls. It was quiet except for the prophetess' soft, powerful voice as she began to pray. "Blessing, put on this," the prophetess whispered, holding her a long white gown. It was strange and heavy as Blessing slipped it over her head, feeling cold fabrics against her skin. She looked around, feeling nervous but powerful. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the answer she had been searching for. The prayer went on and on, the prophetess' voice growing louder, echoing off the walls. Then an hour later, she brought out a thick rope and tied Blessing's hands together. Blessing looked down, her heart pounding. Why was this happening? "Stay strong, child," the prophetess said, her voice almost like a warning. She put out 3 large sticks and lifted them high. Suddenly, with a loud crack, she struck Blessing's back. Blessing gasped in pain, tears filling her eyes. She wanted to run to escape, but the prophetess' voice echoed in her ears. "This is the only way, Blessing. This will drive the spirits away." The beating continued, each strike feeling sharper and heavier. Blessing cried out, but she didn't get to stop. She closed her eyes tightly, praying that this would be the end of her trouble. That after that night, she could finally be free. When morning came, Blessing returned home, her body bruised, her heart heavy. Stephen took one look at her and saw the red, swollen marks across her arms and back. Tears filled his eyes, and he held her close as they both cried. It felt as if all the sadness in the world had gathered around them. But Blessing took a deep breath and whispered, "It is over now, Stephen." The prophet said so. This time, it has to be over. Months passed, and Blessing's heart slowly began to feel lighter. One day, she felt a flutter in her stomach. She was pregnant. This time, she dared to hope. Each day, her tummy grew a little bigger, and the house was filled with laughter and joy. Stephen and Blessing talked about baby's name, imagining their little bundle of joy. Even Debbie helped doing all the chores, so Blessing wouldn't have to lift a finger. When Blessing reached the 5th month, Stephen decided to throw a celebration. It was the first time she had carried a baby this long, and he wanted to celebrate every moment. Friends and family gathered, the house filled with laughter, music, and smell of delicious food. For the first time in a long time, Ruth felt truly happy. After the celebration, that night, after everyone had left, Blessing and Stephen went to bed, smiling and holding hands. But as they drifted into a deep sleep, something strange happened. The mirror in their room smiled, and out of it, a dark figure crept into the room. It was the same monster that has troubled Blessing before. It moved slightly towards Blessing, its shadow looming over her as she lay sleeping. In her dream, Blessing felt the monster's cold touch, and she screamed. She awoke immediately, her heart racing, only to see blood staining the bedsheets around her. Stephen jumped up and they rushed her to the hospital, but deep down, Blessing's mind, already she knew something has happened. The baby was gone. Back at home, the house that had been so full of joy now felt empty. But Blessing sat in silence, feeling as if the world had crumbled around her. The dream of holding her baby, of becoming a mother, felt more distant than ever. She didn't know if she could go through this again, and for the first time, she felt truly defeated. When Blessing came back from the hospital, her stepmother, Mrs. Charity, came to stay with her to help her heal. Every day, Mrs. Charity would sit with her, telling her to be patient and reminding her that things would get better. Blessing would listen, holding on to her stepmother comforting words. Even though her heart felt so heavy, she wanted more than anything to believe that this sadness would end. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the house grew quiet, Mrs. Charity called Blessing and Stephen into the living room. Her voice was serious and her face looked worried. "Blessing and Henry, I think it is time we try something new," she said. "I know a very powerful man who might help us." Stephen was unsure, his face full of doubt, but Blessing looked at him with pleading eyes. She was desperate, willing to do anything just to finally hold her own baby. Reluctantly, Stephen nodded, and they agreed to go the next day. They arrived at the native doctor's shrine, a strange place filled with strange objects hanging from the walls. The smell of burning herbs filled the air. The native doctor looked at them, his eyes dark and mysterious. "If you want to be free, you must make sacrifice," he told Blessing. "You must go to your village and bathe in the river at night." But Blessing felt a chill run down her spine, but she nodded. She was ready to do anything. That night, she traveled to her village alone, feeling both scared and determined. She stood by the river at midnight under the moonlight and did everything the native doctor had asked her. She prayed, hoping that this would finally be the end of her pain. When she returned home, she felt hopeful, thinking maybe this time would be different. A few months later, Blessing discovered she was pregnant again. Her heart swelled with hope and joy, and she took extra care to protect her unborn child. But one night, just as she drifted off to sleep, the monster returned. It was there in her dream, dark and terrifying, and when she woke up, she knew something was wrong. Her heart sank as she realized she has lost the baby again. She felt broken, like all her dreams had crumbled into dust. This time, things changed. Stephen, who had always been there for her, began to grow distant. He seemed frustrated, often avoiding her. One afternoon, Blessing walked into their bedroom and saw Stephen packing clothes into his suitcase. She watched, confused, and asked, "Stephen, are you going elsewhere?" Stephen didn't look at her. He sighed and replied, "No, I am not traveling. I am moving to the other room. I need my space." "Blessing, I don't want to share a room anymore." His word hit her like a stone. Blessing felt her heart broke as she watched him walk away. She wanted to reach out to beg him to stay, but no word came. She just stood there frozen, and Stephen left the room. That night, Blessing lay alone in their bed, staring up at the ceiling with tears streaming down her face. She felt like everything in her life was falling apart. The emptiness surrounded her, and she cried until she drifted off to sleep, wondering if her life would ever be whole again. Days later, Blessing sat alone in the living room, late at night, waiting for Stephen to come home. She had called him over and over, but he didn't answer. She felt worried and hurt, wondering where he could be. Finally, she heard the door creak open. There was Stephen, stumbling in, smelling strongly of a strange perfume and looking tired and drunk. "Where have you been, Stephen, and why didn't you answer my calls?" Blessing asked, her voice filled with worry and anger. Stephen just laughed a little, not looking at her. "Why are you calling me? Do you think I am your baby?" he murmured, pushing past her. "I just want to go to bed." Blessing's heart sank, but she stepped in front of him, refusing to move. "No, Stephen, you are my husband, and I deserve to know where you were," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Stephen's eyes flashed with anger, and before she knew, his hand shot out, slapping her hard across the face. Blessing stormed back, her cheeks stinking as Stephen pushed her past without another word. She stood there in shock, tears streaming down her face, her heart shattered. Debbie, who had been asleep, woke up to the sound of Blessing's crying. She hurried over, wrapping her arms around Blessing, comforting her until she calmed down. That night, Blessing lay in bed, her heart heavy with sadness. She cried quietly, asking God for strength and wondering if these things would ever get better. Blessing couldn't bear the pain any longer. She packed a small bag and left, heading to her stepmother's house. Mrs. Charity welcomed her with open arms, listening as Blessing told her everything. Mrs. Charity was furious when she heard about Stephen hitting Blessing. She called him, warning him that he should never lay hand on Blessing again. She heard Blessing telling her to stay for a few days to rest and clear her mind. But even with her stepmother's comforting words, Blessing felt like a shadow of herself. Every night she prayed, pouring her heart out unto God. "Please, God," she whispered, "I am just an orphan. Please hear me. Please wipe away my tears." After a few days, Blessing decided to return to Stephen's house. She missed him and hoped that maybe, just maybe, things could go back to normal. But when she got home, Stephen didn't say a word to her. He didn't apologize, didn't hug her, didn't even look at her face. Instead, he acted as if she wasn't there, giving her the cold shoulder. Blessing tried to talk to him, tried to remind him of their love, but he only strangled her off. Later one night, feeling desperate, Blessing went to Stephen's room. She sat on his bed, looking at him with pleading eyes. "Stephen, please," she whispered, reaching out to him. "Let's try again. How can I get pregnant if you don't even touch me?" Stephen looked at her, his face hard. "I am tired, Blessing," he said. "Tired of all the hospital visits, the heartbreak, the losses. Just let me be." Blessing's heart ached, but she stayed there, hoping he would change his mind. But with a sigh, Stephen grabbed a pillow, walked out of the room, and left her sitting there alone and heartbroken. One sunny afternoon, Blessing sat quietly in the living room, reading her Bible. She felt a bit of peace as she read, hoping that maybe things would get better soon. Nearby, Debbie was busy cleaning the house, humming softly as she dusted the shelves. Everything seemed calm, but suddenly, Debbie stopped. She started coughing hard, clutching her stomach, and then she dashed to the bedroom and started throwing up. Blessing's heart skipped a beat. She rushed over, knocking on the bedroom's door. "Debbie, are you okay?" Blessing's voice was full of worry. After a few moments, Debbie came out, looking weak and pale. Blessing gently held her by the arm. "Debbie, we need to go to the hospital. I don't want anything to happen to you," she said, her voice shaking. Without wasting a second, Blessing grabbed her car keys and helped Debbie into the car. She drove quickly, her heart pounding. At the hospital, they waited anxiously as the doctor ran tests. Blessing held Debbie's hand, trying to stay calm. Finally, the doctor returned, holding a paper with a serious look on his face. "Debbie, you are 2 months pregnant." Blessing's eyes widened and her heart sank. "Pregnant?" she whispered. She felt confused, unsure what to think. Back at home, she looked at Debbie, her mind racing. She had to know the truth. "Debbie, who is the father?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Debbie looked down, avoiding her sister's eyes. She hesitated, trying to find the right words. After a long silence, she finally confessed, It's Stephen." Blessing's words seemed to crumble around her. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She thought she knew Debbie, though they had no secrets. But now this was too much. She felt both sad and betrayed. They sat together, both crying, their hearts heavy. After a while, they heard the door open. Stephen was back from work. He looked at the both women sitting on the floor. Confused, "What is going on? Why are you both crying? Did something happen?" Blessing stood up slowly, her face wet with tears. She walked towards Stephen, her hands clenched into fists. She started pounding on his chest, sobbing. You fool!" she cried. "You have been sleeping with my sister, and now she is pregnant. How could you do this?" Stephen's face turned pale. He dropped to his knee. His own tears began to fall. "I am so sorry, Blessing. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please forgive me," he begged. But Blessing was too heartbroken. She turned away from him, feeling like her whole world had shattered. She went into the bedroom, grabbed a bag, and started packing her things. She felt numb, barely aware of what was doing. As she walked out of the house, she looked back one last time, her heart heavy with sadness and betrayal. Without saying another word, she left, feeling like her heart had been torn into a million pieces. When Blessing got home, she felt broken. Her heart ached. Her tears seemed endless. She told her stepmother everything that had happened. How her own sister Debbie was pregnant with her husband, Stephen's baby. Her stepmother, Mrs. Charity, listened quietly, but her face grew serious and angry. She couldn't believe the betrayal and felt deeply disappointed. She called Stephen and Debbie over for a serious talk. She looked at both of them seriously, her eyes full of anger and sadness. "What you both did is terrible," she scolded. "You have hurt Blessing and brought shame to our family." Her voice shook with disappointment. After a long pause, she said, "But what is done is done. No daughter of mine will have a baby in this house without being married. Stephen, you must marry Debbie and marry her fast before her pregnancy starts to show." Blessing cried all night, her heart shattered, but a small part of her understood that maybe her stepmother was only trying to do what she thought was best for Debbie now that things had gone wrong. Blessing couldn't stop blaming herself, wondering if maybe she should have paid closer attention to her sister. 2 weeks later, Stephen and Debbie had their wedding. Blessing felt like she was watching a bad dream that she couldn't escape. Debbie moved fully into matrimonial bedroom with Stephen, and the two seemed happy together. Life went on, and Debbie seemed to be enjoying her new life as Stephen's wife. Stephen treated her like gold, always dotting her and making sure she was comfortable. As Debbie's pregnancy reached 8 months, Stephen threw a huge party to celebrate. He was so proud that they had come this far, and he wanted everyone to join in the joy. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered, filling the house with laughter and excitement. Debbie's mother was thrilled, her eyes sparkling with happiness for her daughter. During the party, Debbie excused herself to touch up her makeup. Her best friend, who had helped plan the celebration, went with her. They went into the bedroom, laughing and chatting. Debbie walked up to the mirror to check her lipstick, fixing her hair as she looked at her reflection. Her friend noticed the mirror and wrinkled her nose. "Debbie, is this Stephen's mirror?" she asked. "I think it is kind of ugly, especially with those gold design around it. This doesn't look like your style at all." Debbie laughed and struggled. I think it's ugly too, but it's always been here since I moved in. Maybe it is special to Stephen. I was thinking of moving it to my room and putting my own mirror here. Her friend grinned. Well, let me help you move it now. She went to grab the mirror, still chatting and laughing with Debbie, but as she tried to lift it, something strange happened. Her fingers slipped, and with a loud crash, the mirror fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. For a moment, the room was silent, and the two friends stared at the broken glass scattered across the floor. In the living room, everyone was laughing and having a good time. Debbie's mother let all of a sudden, "No!" Her voice was so loud and filled with fear that it made everyone stop. She jumped up and rushed into the bedroom where the mirror was broken. Stephen and all the guests followed, confused and worried. When they got to the bedroom, they saw the mirror shattered into pieces on the floor. Debbie's mother dropped to her knee right next to the broken glass and started crying. "I am finished," she cried, her voice loud and filled with fear. "I am finished." Everyone in the room was puzzled and kept asking, "What is wrong? Why are you so upset over a broken mirror?" Debbie felt embarrassed and tried to calm her mother down. "Mom, please stop embarrassing me. It's just a mirror. We can get a new one." But Debbie's mother shook her head and shouted, "No, this is not just a mirror. This mirror is my life." Everyone was shocked, and they looked at her with wide eyes. They had never seen her act in this way before. She took a deep breath, her face paled with fear, and began to speak. "I have to confess, I gave this mirror to Blessing, my stepdaughter, on her wedding day. But it wasn't a gift of love. I gave it to her to secretly watch her, to control her, and to ruin her life." The guests gasped, unable to believe what they were hearing. Debbie's mother went on. "From the moment I met Blessing's father, I knew he would only marry me if I promised to love Blessing like my own daughter. But I never truly loved her. I was jealous of her. She took too much of his attention, and he loved her deeply. Even after I had Debbie, he treated Blessing better. I pretended to love Blessing so my husband wouldn't know the truth. But deep inside, I was filled with hatred." She paused, her eyes filled with regret. "After Blessing's father passed away, I kept up the act, pretending to be the loving stepmother. But I secretly wanted her life to be miserable. I wanted her to fail, to suffer. When Blessing found Stephen and brought him home, it made me even angrier. Blessing was happy, she was successful, and my own daughter Debbie was struggling. I couldn't bear it. Everyone stared, too stunned to speak." She continued. "So I went to a native doctor. He gave me this mirror, a magical mirror. He told me to place it in Blessing's room. This mirror would allow us to see into her life, to know her every move. Every time she got pregnant, we used the mirror to cast spell to make her lose her baby. We even made her husband start to hate her. But there was one condition: the mirror must not ever be broken. That is why I am finished." Tears streamed down her face as she looked around the room. "I am so sorry for everything I did to Blessing. I was wrong. My jealousy ruined my life." Just as she finished, a strange look came over her face. She began to pull at her clothes. Looking lost and confused, she stood up and ran into the street. Stephen and Debbie followed her as they approached the gate. The gate man suddenly spoke up. "I will confess, Stephen, Debbie's baby, it's mine. I have been sleeping with her, and when she got pregnant, we made a plan. She would seduce you and make you think the baby was yours, because I knew I couldn't take care of it. I am sorry, sir, but I want my baby." Gasps filled the air. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. Debbie's mother fell to the ground, crying and begging for forgiveness, her face wet with tears. Stephen was speechless, his face turned red with anger, and hunt. He couldn't take it anymore. He quickly got into his car and drove off, the guests feeling awkward and uncomfortable. Slowly left, each one heading to their own home, leaving the place silent and empty. Stephen drove straight to Blessing's house, his mind racing with guilt. When he arrived, he found Blessing lying on the floor in the living room, her eyes closed, holding her Bible as she prayed. She was asking for peace and strength, unaware that Stephen was watching her with tear-filled eyes. Stephen slowly knelt beside her, his head bowed. When Blessing looked up, she was surprised to see him there. "Blessing, I am sorry," he whispered. He told her everything, the truth about her stepmom, Debbie, the gate man, the lies, and the heartbreak. As he spoke, both of them cried, the weight of everything heavy on their hearts. Stephen begged her to forgive him, saying he wanted to make things right and heal together. Blessing, with tears in her eyes, saw the pain in Stephen's heart and slowly forgave him. They hugged each other tightly and shared a tender kiss, promising to start fresh. Blessing packed her things and together they drove back to Stephen's house, hoping to start a new chapter. But when they arrived, the house was empty. Debbie was gone, the guests were gone, and even the gate man was nowhere to be found. It was as if they had all vanished. Blessing tried calling, but her phone was off, and no one knew where she had gone. 2 months later, Blessing and Stephen decided to leave everything behind. They moved to America, ready to begin a new life. Months passed, and one day, Blessing discovered she was expecting. Stephen was overjoyed, and both were filled with happiness and hope. This time, everything went smoothly. Blessing carried her baby safely, and when the time came, she gave birth to healthy twins, a beautiful boy and girl. The couple finally had their happy ending, filling their new home with love and laughter. If you like this story, please share, comment, and subscribe for more African stories. Thank you.